Hello, this is Jacob Kishere. You're watching Sense-Based Podcast. Just wanted to offer a brief introduction to this dialogue with Ken Lowry. Firstly, to say that Ken is a philosopher and medical practitioner, somebody who has been drawn into the orbit of the world of John Vervaeke and others, a really inspirational conversation going on around faith, fellowship, making sense of the breakdown of meaning of religion in our time. And Ken is somebody who I find to be sincerely participating in the search for wisdom, as his channel, Climbing Mount Sophia, indicates, climbing the mountain of wisdom. And that's something that we kind of reference and sought to do a little bit together in this dialogue. Ken really ended up taking the lead on questioning and playing more of the Socratic role in this dialogue, but it was a real pleasure, and I'm very grateful to him for that. He was able to help me illuminate and bring to words some really profound transformations that I've been experiencing over the last 4 or 5 months, and particularly the last month. This really has been a period of retreat for me, in which I have not been posting, sharing. I've really been appreciating my privacy and the kind of richness that can be cultivated privately, but also going through a massive dark night of the soul, period of crisis and difficulty, and with that, some deepening of faith that I didn't expect or know that I would find, a deepening connection with prayer, and most recently, what I explored with Ken was a kind of culmination of a journey into the symbol of the cross and how I got there and what it's meant. And that's something that Ken's had a number of dialogues about too. We also spoke about psychedelics and their significance, about the rediscovery of awe, about the importance of listening in dialogue and in life, of grief, and I felt a real aliveness in this dialogue, despite the fact that I had had a big cry and expunging of some grief about an hour before the dialogue. So I definitely was somewhat beleaguered in my capacity to be sharp in the dialogue, but with the helpful participation of Ken, I think we were able to get somewhere really meaningful nonetheless, and he was able to draw out some distillation and clarity from me that was quite rewarding, and hopefully will be of service and interest to you all as well. So thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us for this dialogue, and for those of you who are participating in this earnest journey for wisdom, I salute you and look forward to seeing how this conversation provokes and participates in the wider conversation. So thank you and enjoy. Okay, welcome to Sense Space. Today I'm here with Ken Lowry. It's going to be our first conversation together, but I'm pretty excited to have you on and to really explore some of the themes that you've been bringing to life in your channel, Climbing Mount Sophia, and in your recent dialogues with John Vervaeke and others in this wisdom, meaning-finding, faith-exploring space. And so with that, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and what it is you're called to, and what's bringing you to life in such a way that you're participating in this kind of wisdom commons.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here and to talk to you. I My journey to this place, I guess, has been one that I like the word proleptic, and this way in which things call to you long before you know what they are. Um, this journey, I grew up as a kind of in a fundamentalist Christian framework, and so I was very all my models of reality were fairly saturated with the biblical stories and that kind of language. But it was also very a very small world because it was very tight in the constraints of that. And but I was able to listen to some people who were wiser than me and avoid some of the trauma and resentment that happens for a lot of people in coming out of those kinds of spaces. And then through my journey since then, I've made it a practice of trying to listen to people who I know to be wiser than I am. And so, that's kind of the shortest answer to say how I've come to where I am. Jordan Peterson, there's people who are close to me who've been deeply important, but in terms of people who others would know, Jordan Peterson was a big shift in my life, especially the two rules of tell the truth or at least don't lie, and treat yourself like someone you care about. Those two things really kind of grabbed a hold of me. And I would say that they both oriented me toward taking my own life and my own experience seriously, and really being careful to try to speak the truth and think in terms of truth, and that being some kind of combination of accuracy and precision, as best as I possibly could. And to do that with an aim toward that which is good, which is beyond that which I might know. And so, yeah, I mean, starting doing those things, and then Jonathan Pajot from Jordan Peterson, and then I discovered John Vervaeke, and John Vervaeke's work has been, it is now kind of, it's constitutive of who I am as a person in a lot of ways, because it's something that I've internalized very deeply on many different levels. So then, I've kind of gotten to speak with John on a few occasions, and partly because of that, I decided to start the YouTube channel just to see if I could, just to see where I'm at, and if it would be a way to connect to other people such as yourself. And there are some people that seem to be getting benefit from that, and I'm certainly getting a lot of benefit from getting to have fun conversations with interesting people by means of that. So yeah, that's kind of my story.
Yeah, I feel a lot of resonance in that. I think we're at a confluence in this conversation, and I kind of can look back to 2018, 2019 and see myself with the IDW kind of scene popping off. And I had a little bit of a Sam Harris background and New Atheist background, but also Peterson came in, and I really note that as a juncture in which, watching those biblical lectures, it was clear that there was something that through the embodied sort of logos energy that he was expressing in those lectures, and so I was kind of straddling those two, and also in an exploration with psychedelics, subsequently meditation and so on. And that somehow led me right up to this next tributary or confluence of Rebel Wisdom, Jordan Hall. Particularly Jordan Hall was a big influence on me, and I had one or two conversations with him that just shifted the whole direction of my wisdom journey. And then from him to John and Guy and Chris, and that was the start of my project, really. I
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I had an interest in religion. I went down a kind of rabbit hole with Islam and political Islam, trying to understand that whole world of what, all the way over to jihadism to mainstream, understand the relationships. And in hindsight, I've wondered whether I wasn't, we have this way that we're drawn to something outside that feels like the other, but actually there's something in it that's of ourself that we're coming to know. I think perhaps on some level I was drawn to, find what is that state of devotion, of belief that is.
Yeah, how might it be that people are committed enough to something to act the way they might? And how might I find what it means to believe in something that much? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. In hindsight, at the time I was in this intellectual project of trying to understand it, to play my part in the Islam West dialogue conflict. So in any case, I shifted away from that and into dialogos and into more of a concern with my own healing and so on. And like you, I found that, I guess before I found faith, I had faith in dialogue. And consistently coming back to it and getting to that place beyond where we started out.
What do you think it was that, what, if you can point to it, what particular aspects of, say, the dialogue space drew you out of kind of the intellectual project?
I would say two things, if I can just, I'm loosely sketching it here, but one was the lack of interest in conversational inquiry that I was finding in the academy, in the field that I was trying to go into. There was a lot of fragmentation of knowledge, and there wasn't much interest in this wide-ranging conversation that was exploring many levels, from what's going on at the political, geopolitical, down to the deep history and civilizational dynamics and psychology.
And
all of that. And
so I almost hear a sense of, if I can just paraphrase and I'm following you, a sense of you experience the disharmony of almost like a pigeonholing of knowledge that was disconnected from a whole. And it was moving back to recognizing that I'm not something over here looking at something over there, but that we're actually caught up in this whole movement of things across many levels that drew you away from that. Yes.
It took about 3 or 4 years to get there, but I got to a point where I realized, I got to the limits of being the Western objective observer of the Islamic other, and I reached the point where actually I'm seeing the lens through which I'm seeing the language through which I'm seeing, and I'm finding it so necessary now to try and get as close to the other as I can, to embody the other, to truly myself in the postures of that other faith, and see.
Did you find yourself drawn into practicing Islam at all at that point?
I don't think I ever got quite that far, but I listened to a lot of lectures. I observed very closely when I went to mosques, and I did little experiments. I did explore the prayer postures for myself, and I was into yoga at the time, so I was thinking what's going on here? Maybe there's some physiological relief that you get just from there, and what's the felt sense of submission and so on. And then there was this parallel journey of having had my first LSD trip and kind of followed that thread through kind of Terence McKenna world, and feeling like there was something, the way I would put it is like at the edge of almost at the edge of his speech, like something that was speech that was not necessarily the content, but bound up with it. But it was like the wisdom was in the flow. And then I sort of found that in Jordan. Jordan was the first person I found it. It was like a, living, participating player who was doing that. And then when I hit
it's something like weaving words together in such a way that you see through them instead of only looking at them. They almost like call you beyond them. Is that what you're?
Yes. Yeah. Psychedelic speech in a certain sense.
Can I ask really quick, before you keep going? I'm curious as to where the psychedelic route came in here, because you're like, the picture that I have of you is kind of an intellectual exploring this space of Islam and trying to. So where does the LSD find a way in there?
Yeah, I had a weird split during my university years where I was in school in London, and I was in like East London in a very Islamic area, and had this deep interest and was with debate club and new atheists and so on. And then I had like California Jacob on the other side in the summers. And then I got into an exchange program at UCSD for a year. Met loads of interesting stoners at UCSD, rushed to fraternity, fell in love with my first love, and we, smoked cannabis together and so on, and then had the first LSD trip with her at the end. So, and then
cool.
Fired out back to London and was like having to integrate that. But
sure.
That opened the door, and then the exploration continued.
How essential would you say that aspect of it was to actually have the experience with LSD to kind of like open you up a little bit? Was that kind of an essential aspect for you, or do you feel like I probably would be in a similar place as I am now regardless?
100% essential.
In what way?
An ontological opening, in felt experience of what's possible that I could not have possibly conceived of without experiencing it.
Okay. Yeah. I'm like, because psychedelics is one of the things, and I mean, if you're familiar with my content, you've seen me push at it with different people in different ways, and I've had some experience myself, and like I'm trying to figure out what to make of it and how to integrate it in a way that that does proper honor to both its power and the dangers of it, but also its power and the positive potential that it holds for us.
And I was really, I guess that's one of the characteristics of you and your channel that really made it clear that I wanted to have a dialogue with you, because you're at that intersection of what's going on with Christianity and Christ consciousness, and what's going on with psychedelics is a way into that. And then you also had mentioned, having an experience with psilocybin, and that you were looking at going to work with delivering these medicines with facilitation. And that's something I'm very interested in too. So I would love to hear more about that too. And just to I mean, other sort of route that I want to go in the course of this is, for me, it went from that was mystery a sense of the unknown, of mystery, of that which I don't know, came long before the sense of God. So mystery, and then nature mysticism, and then only recently more of that relationship kind of thing.
Yeah. In terms of where I'm at with psychedelics, and in some sense, I'm trying to feel my way in to that kind of intersection point that you're talking about. I feel myself being there, and I'm not trying to do it in service of psychedelics, although I think that's playing a role. I'm trying to do it just in the service of, well, I guess rightly you would say the service of God, but therefore not in the service of any of the particular aspects of the intersection, and just to try to find how they come together to play in such a way as to understand how they've contributed to the journey that I've been on, which I'm fairly confident has led me much closer to God than when I started. And so in a lot of ways, that's how I view all of this stuff in terms of climbing on Mount Sophia, in terms of having engaging in dialogos, is this, okay, how can I take my life and be really true to that and bring it into almost a shared space in such a way that we can, combine attention to understand how these parts play together to create the melody of being, something like that. And so for me, that's, that it means so many different things on so many different levels. And so I want all the aspects of my life to be playing around this theme. And, when I've been on this journey, most of my life is disjointed in all these interesting ways. And I've found that more and more I'm coming to coalesce things in such a way that they, even when I'm washing the dishes or changing my baby's diaper or whatever mundane task, it's caught up in the symphony of the whole thing. And so, my work already allows me to do a lot of that, but I'm hoping to be able to bring in a dimension, whether it's actually, it's very much not clear yet how it might look in terms of a career type trajectory with being a psychedelics facilitator, because it's so new. But I want to be faithful to the entire project, and I feel like engaging in that space, which might be one of the most significant tension points in the current moment, engaging in that space in the real world will hopefully help to make more sense of it. So that's my engagement in that.
Could you say more about the tension point?
Well, it's like, even within myself, there's tension surrounding psychedelics. Anytime I have a conversation, especially publicly like this, that brings in psychedelics, there's all kinds of tensions around it in terms of what might people think or how this might be interpreted. And so it scales out across all these levels of our individual psyches and collective cultural posture towards these substances that have played roles that we do not understand in our own histories. And I think I'm trying to think about how to come at what I want to say here. When you talked about your experience with psychedelics, the word that comes up for me is awe. You maybe had never, it almost sounded like you hadn't really experienced awe until you had that LSD trip. And that oh, like that sense of awe, and that borders on horror, but also the profound humility that creates in you, and but also the joy of being, like that tidal wave of awe is, like, I mean, Socrates, the wisdom begins in wonder. Christ's, you must be to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must become as a little child. I think all of these kinds of things are pointing towards awe as fundamental. And the thing about the modern Western frame and intellectual context, especially of kind of a reductive rationalism, is so lacking in awe, because if you are exploring something, you're way out on the tip of the spear of some kind of like abstract knowledge that's not really meaningful, hardly. And so I guess the tension, I think that's where the tension lies, is that people, we're dying for awe, we're dying for wonder, but we want to feel as if we're controlling the wonder. And psychedelics, in some way, fundamentally, like, throw you to the, they throw you out in the ocean in that sense. That you're not in charge anymore. And so I think that's a big part of why they have so much potential positive impact, but also why there's so much tension around them. It's the spirit that seeks to keep awe at bay, you might say, has a lot to lose.
I'm just letting that sit. When you started speaking about awe, I started to feel more connected to myself very quickly. It felt, I could feel the emotional aliveness of that, and it connects me right back. That first trip in San Francisco with my first love, and I had been so interested in the counterculture since childhood, growing up in England, inexplicably drawn to this period of the late 60s. And so when I had that trip and I went around San Francisco, I was like, holy shit, some of the it's still here. Like, I could feel it. I could feel the resonance of it still in the place. And it was a very trippy trip, perhaps one of the trippiest I've had. And also, as an aside to that, whilst I have had very recently more of a ceremonial experience, I had a first ayahuasca ceremony in May. Prior to that, for the, let's see, about 5 years preceding, most experiences I had were all in the context of intimate relationships. Women that I was dating or living with, who, I would journey into these terrains with. So love is there with the awe. It's up there, and there's something about the notion of a psychedelic explorer. When you are creating the conditions for this yourself in your own home with people that you're very close to, you're permissioning a space of exploration that can go in many, many dimensions and directions, but you are deviating from consensus reality when you do that. And you're opening a space where a different reality can become possible.
So in that frame, So I don't, if you want to keep going there, or
Please. I'm enjoying
okay,
the of this. So
okay. So I'm curious about the because one of the classical kind of critiques of psychedelics is maybe precisely this notion of becoming a psychonaut and then, disconnecting from the real world. And I think that's a very real and pertinent danger in some cases. I've seen it personally with other people where, they engage in the space for the purpose of escaping the collective sense of reality that we all share. And then as a result of that, their participation in the collective reality is hampered. And I think that's a valid concern and a real concern. But there's also a lot of us for which the opposite has been the case, that our journeys into alternate realities on psychedelics has actually afforded a much deeper participation in the collective space, and a participation in the collective space that is not somehow kind of just tolerating it in some kind of Gnostic sense because we have a desire to escape back to this other, but rather to participate in the collective space in a way that brings the awe back with us, and it infuses it into this the space we all share together, and results in massive movements toward the positive. So I'm curious about like how you would think and talk about that dynamic.
yeah, there's a feeling. I think the integration of these things generally goes in the direction that you reach in the psychedelic state is here, and the integration of the realization that there is here, then that comes with you wherever you are. So you can develop a sensitivity to the awe and wonder of everyday life, and that connection is a connection to mystery, the mystery of what's going on. You can be participating soberly, functionally, hopefully artfully in the goings on of your life, whatever that includes, but simultaneously you can be, in a certain sense, seeing through or seeing to the edges of things as they are. I've often found that it was at the edges of things, in a literal sense, visually, that I was able to kind of reconnect with that, sitting at a table, sitting at a computer. So it's starting to notice the edge of where your consciousness and your senses are co-creating the reality in real time. And I think that possibility of kind of going out, getting disconnected from society and getting more connected, they're both part of the journey as far as I can tell. And the risk of one maybe is not possible without the risk and reward of both are bound into undergoing this process. How you undergo that process, some people will go through stages where they're journeying more or with more frequency. I had quite a number of trips with my partner in Berlin during COVID years. Really important, transformative time, but we were definitely living in our own world to a significant degree, and as everybody was. But I think for me the challenge was less becoming disconnected and more opening up sensitivity to a degree that was not yet integrated. And my flow of language right now is it's not flowing as smoothly as I would like, but opening up sensitivity without having the co-requisite sort of
Mm,
boundary capacity, as
sure.
simple as I can put it. So, and that's a consequence of psychedelic journeying, but it's also trauma healing and integration, these kinds of processes, which are usually kind of after a certain amount of time, that's the same journey to me. Opening you up in a raw way where you just, I definitely went through a period where I was just like really, really sensing like way too much. Just like sensing every little flutter of anxiety or energy and other people and so on. And there was a process of kind of like reining that in, and I don't think I lost the sensitivity that I gained, but it became more well held, I guess.
Mm,
I think kind of getting both more of a traditional masculine training essence, I guess, like those kinds of things, like physical
mm,
training and the connection with the kind of masculine aggression essence, like that kind of spectrum of self,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
as well as making dialogue my practice for 2 years and showing up consistently again and again. I decided to create a one-to-one Dialogos practice, and then was trying to make this kind of a freelance business for a period of time. And the wonderful consequence of that was just like showing up.
yeah.
My own process is, going like this. And so the times when I was like out of whack or overly sensitive or whatever else, still showing up for those usually guys that I was in dialogue with,
Mm.
was really good training for that.
Yeah, man. Like, I guess one of the things, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. One of the things that I'm hearing kind of recur through that is this sense of a movement between, order and chaos, to use Peterson's language of okay, sensing into the world now, and maybe sensing into the world from the place of an overly brittle structure that you started with, and then then finding ways to gather that together into a way that, as you said, is more well held. And I think that's such a wise way to go about it, because there's a sense of being well held, the sense of posture. And I think been thinking about that so much recently, that thinking of my being in the world as posture, and what posture am I holding in each relationship to each and everything. And when you were talking about then showing up, this here recently, that's been a bit of what my journey has been, because my channel has kind of, all of a sudden I have more conversations than I have time for, in terms of possibilities, and I want to have them all, right? Like if it was up to me, I'd not do much else probably, but that wouldn't be good for me, obviously. And so, but I also, my first child is 1 month old, and so that's I mean, it's a transition on an existential level, like nothing nothing I've ever experienced before, certainly. And I was thinking about it the other day, right? The thresholds in life are birth and death, and we have no control over them for ourselves, but we get to participate in the bringing across of the threshold of birth, an extension of ourselves. And so that, like, existentially, it's just it's an overwhelming kind of experience to go through. So I'm going through that while still showing up for these kind of conversations. So I deeply resonate and feel that sense of, okay, where am I today? Right. Because it's like every day it's like this all the time. And so it's, yeah, I so much appreciate what you're saying there. And especially that sense of holding well, maybe just ourselves and our own sense of being in the world when we're moving through spaces that are that we may feel overwhelmed, but yet we are still showing up.
I think where this is leading me to that there is a kind of resilience and capacity to enter into other people's worlds that is the fruit of this. That through that discipline that you are cultivating, and also from navigating those realms, those things together can give you the capacity to be the space holder and like calmly be present to whatever is in the other person. And so whatever that balance is that I was describing, of like reaching the balance in myself, like how can I hold the sensitivity whilst having that the centering, the posture, that seems to be the kind of that's what affords the shamanic, the neo-shamanic kind of work capacity.
Yeah. Midwifery, maybe.
Through the sensing of, through the deep sensing of the other, that you can allow their world to come forward.
Yeah, because there's
that's something I see in you in the way that you're engaging in dialogue.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, there's that sense of like, if you can hear, and this is part of that, what you were saying earlier, with like what you first heard with Terence McKenna, and hearing past the edge of the words. And this has been so helpful for me. And I know Guy a very small amount in the circling practice. I've only dipped my toes in, although I would like to get much more involved. But that's that sense that I get with that, is it's, this purposeful moving into a kind of space where I can hold space for you and hear what you say, but then call to what I see beyond it. And that sense of in the posture, and this is why I love the Mount Sophia symbol so much as a way of characterizing really these conversations, is that it's grand enough that it can hold it, for one thing, but it's also, it creates a posture where, okay, now we're cooperating adventurers moving through the idea space and looking together, regardless of which one of us is talking, right? Whichever one of us is talking is just, the one putting the things into the space, you might say. But there's no, like, we always perceive that the person who's listening is doing less than the person who's talking. And I don't think that's right.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the conventional perception. I think in philosophy world, it's probably the opposite. Yeah, I think that's when I've encountered masters, when I've encountered the people wiser than myself, which is also what I've sought to do, you can really feel the listening's working on you.
Mhm.
It's active. The listening can be psychoactive, and that is, I would say, in terms of like a pedagogy of dialogue and dialogos, listening's core. Listening is the ground before speech. And
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, I mean, what we're talking about here, from my perspective, is something very much like the participation with agape, and that this is actually the manner in which we can participate in agape in such a way as to, bring the kingdom of heaven onto earth. That in the because in order to really listen to someone, you can't hold your own self. You can't hold lenses between you and them. You have to actually drop all of that, drop kind of all the self-interest, and to kind of come around to be there with them in the space. But because of the manner in which attention functions as at least from an existential point of view, like the primacy of ontology, right? Like, if you're in that space truly with the other person, giving them your full attention without any expectation, without any kind of boundaries, it actually allows for their own being in that moment, even if they are not capable of holding that space for themselves.
the kingdom of heaven was the illumined word in that that I need to return to, because we have to be able to see it, and in the seeing, feeling it too, and that is something that lives beyond the dialogue. And so I can see there's two, and maybe they're one, but for now there's two here. There's this mutual listening, dialogue, mutual disclosure, in which we can hopefully get beyond ourselves and get beyond the subtle presumptions. They may even be more subtle than presumptions. They may just be ephemeral fog. I definitely feel I'm bringing in a little bit of fog today. That in the depth of listening to you, in the giving over of listening to you, I get beyond my own fog.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a possibility of joy in the clearing, and knowing of a different knowing of reality together than that which we came in individually.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in dialogue, and I can see there's a strong this whole matter in religion of like not naming the thing, not just not naming it, but not naming it too directly or too soon. And I can really feel that, like, I'm not trying to perhaps in some way I'm trying not to get to the mountaintop too directly, even though I have a strong sense that, that's what we're both kind of climbing on right now and looking at. We by necessity somehow have to be at a lower peak of it and looking up, and we get a glimpse, and then clouds pass over, and then you hike a little more, and then the clouds clear, and you're like, oh wow. And there's a great beauty in that too. For me, I think, having lived around mountains in Germany for some time, the fog and the way that it would cover over things, and you just get little peaks. Well, it's really very beautiful.
Mm. It reminds me of, have you ever heard of a guy by the name of John O'Donohue?
Is that an Irish poet or something?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And philosopher. And I love his work. It's had a huge impact on me. But one of the ways, he has a very artful use of language. And one of the ways he talks about the mind and our own experience is that we ought to be careful not to shine on it with neon lights and maintain a kind of almost candlelit posture as we analyze and move through the landscapes of our own cognitive spaces. And that's difficult for me to do personally, because I tend to be someone who is hell bent on running straight to the peak at any chance I can get. But I want to back up. There's a few other places I was going to go, but I want to back up to one of the things you said that stuck out to me. But this clearing of the fog that I myself am experiencing by actively listening to you. That brings in some of the notions of it's better to give than to receive. And the greatest among you will be least of all. And which I think plays nicely with Socrates, and the posture that Socrates would take in the dialogues is certainly provocative, but also mostly characterized by a epistemic humility. And just that kind of, really ecstasis of the self is actually the thing that allows for the clearing internally. It's like if I move out of myself and just actually give of my attention to allow the other to be fully what they are, then I will actually, by so doing, the space may clear within.
I think that in the second sense of this of being by oneself and finding that opening, finding the clearing, it's the same in some sense. I have to give myself over to the light on the water, or the birds flying in murmurations. Like I have to, first observe, like there's an initial observing of it, and then perhaps from observing, being with it, tracking it, and through the tracking of it, I'm beginning to like move with it with my attention. And then from there, eventually, epiphany.
Yeah.
There seems to be some sort of threshold, an invisible threshold in relationship to life, creation, earth, in which what you're seeing through, what you're communing with in the birds and in the water has grown to be the whole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you are communing with the whole, and then things become possible that weren't possible before that threshold was crossed. And part of what has really led to a deepening of my faith in the last month has been one of those experiences. And I experienced a terrific healing in the course of that moment. And I've had many, many, many such experiences. This relation to nature has been core to how I enjoy my life, and also core to how I underwent a healing journey over several years. But I'm rather wordless as to what happened in that moment. But I came away having experienced a kind of conversion. Not in the sense that I converted to join a group or a set of ideas. There's like another version of conversion, or an older version that I've encountered, which is it's a conversion of the heart. It's like something in you has shifted, and now it's just different. It's just something's fundamentally changed to what it was before you had that experience.
Do you would it be comfortable for you to share what the experience was? If not, that's okay. I'm just curious.
Yes, but I'm not sure in what sense you're asking.
Maybe like, I guess in kind of like just a narrative fashion, because I'm curious about that in a curiosity sense, but I'm wondering about, you mentioned this conversion that happened, and I'd like to move towards that more, but I would like to maybe understand a little bit more of the context first.
Yeah, let's see. Let me tell you my whole life story. Gosh.
If it's too much, that's okay, and we can move on to the second part.
It's not too much, but it's going to be a little. I'd spoken before about the draw to mystery and the encounter of that in nature, and that had been a healing journey for me whilst I was doing the Dialogos journey. And say fall time last year, end of second wave COVID, things were getting very dark, especially for us living in Germany. There was a real feeling of an authoritarian wave moving through. It was an intense time, and I had a breakthrough into prayer during that time, which was very emotional for me. And I just found myself like putting out my hands and really feeling the full energy of that, feeling the connection. And then I moved to a little Catholic village in Bavaria with my partner, with my fiance, and it was everywhere adorned with crosses, including the state. Like if you go on a hike, there'd be the stages of the cross on the hike. But it was very and over the course of many months, I seemed to have been drawn into the cross. trying to not even like actively trying. It was just like the process of being drawn to understand it was unfolding, let's say.
Hmm.
And during the course of that year, I start praying in the church in the village more regularly. And went through a really challenging period around spring in which I was separating. The
Mm.
reality of separation with my fiance was becoming clear.
Mm.
During the course of that, then the prayer became kind of, it became a daily ritual.
Mm.
And there was a lot of other transformations going on in me. Also, the month that I had that ayahuasca ceremony,
Mm.
there was a lot of different things moving.
Yeah.
And all of this is to really say, like, it wasn't this kind of, I don't even want to say Christian, but Christ-minded orientation. It didn't pop out of nowhere. There's been this unintentional, gradual drift or build,
Hmm.
or which really started out, by the way, with mushrooms, and the place that I found myself communing with in the two mushroom experiences I had really became the placeholder for what it means to be in communion with God.
Mm.
Um, and so, fast forward, post separation, went through a real dark night of the soul in the
Mm.
deepest sense. And that brought me back home to my home country. So it was a huge disruption of basically all the knowns in my life. And
Mm.
there was something in the loss that seemed to me that it would never be resolved,
Mm.
or kind of
Mm.
a synthesis in myself that felt impossible. And I would just shift between these sort of two predominant modes over the course of weeks and so on.
Mm.
So about a month ago, I moved to stay with my cousins for a couple of weeks, right in my hometown, like right where my parents grew up. I went walking in this pool park, which is where I would have gone as a child. And it was a very stormy, intense week in terms of the climate, like these really erratic storms that you could just hear all night long. And I had found myself reading these books by Richard Rohr, who was
Mm.
he's found my Christian guy, apparently, because I've been blitzing through his work, which my cousin had a bunch of his books at his house. So I just found myself reading. I would just finish work every day and I would sit and read Richard Rohr books. And yeah, I seemed to be getting drawn more and more into this, and a felt presence of God became more continuous, even without prayer. Like the prayer practice kind of fell off, but the
Mm.
sort of presence has has been much more ongoing.
Mm.
And yet still I was wrestling with this pretty terrible wound and feeling that I was kind of, something that felt so real, as real as if I'd been jousted in the chest, you know?
Absolutely.
And then I had a dream of the crucifixion that week. And it wasn't the crucifixion of Christ. It was a biblical set dream, and it was of another man uh, being put up for crucifixion. And I also had a cold during that time, and I think that kind of impacted the quality of what was going on in me, because I had a horrible, torturous dream, really excruciating vision of this man being put up on the cross, and like the tearing of the flesh, and the relentlessness of that suffering. Like, not basically, he's going up on the cross, and this his kind of foot is starting to tear from the other part of his foot, and he's wishing for it to end, but his eyes are kind of like sewn open. In that moment I wake up, head's banging cold, and the wind is banging like outside as well. And so then it's the next day, or possibly the day after that, I'm not totally clear on the timeline, that I'm in Pool Park down the street, and I had a little cannabis, which has been been a huge part of my life as a catalyst and sacrament and way of communing with nature and so on. I went on one of those walks, and the walk ended up with me by this body of water, watching these murmurations going by. And I'd been drawn to them over several days, but this day it felt like it reached like a consummation. Just like, I can't even tell you like how awe-inspiring and beautiful these murmurations going by, and like joining together into one body and then separating off in two bodies of birds going around. And I had that felt sense that I was seeing into the indescribable mystery of creation. The mind of God, witnessing the mind of God moving. It was at the moment of witnessing that I had this experience of opening. And I felt like sort of, tears flowing. There's been a fucking lot of tears flowing for me. That's not new. That's been
Sure.
an ongoing healing thing for months and years. But
Absolutely.
In this case, there's a certain kind of quality of tears where it feels like it's like kind of sap coming up from deep inside. And I believe I got to the bottom. And I kind of had given the thing that I couldn't resolve over. And I felt different ever since then. I felt healed, but not like a way where a lot of Christian people are like jumping up and down for it. For the most part, it's just been like kind of like a like empty kind of silence. Periodically, just like waves of gratitude, waves of just like tears, heart opening, appreciating everyday things very deeply. And so it's as if the love, somehow letting go of my strongest loving attachments, led to a deeper connection with God. And given the whole, this arc, my partner Hannah, we had it was as a consequence of being with her that the language of God had come into my life more. She was from a Christian Science background, but much more Christian than I ever was, even though my dad was a minister and so on. But I can see like an arc, I can see a strange directionality from the 5 gram mushroom journey we went on together, and these kinds of what felt like an experience, like a first-hand experience of Christ consciousness in myself at the conclusion of that, coming through to this fascination with the cross and with collective trauma in Germany, and yeah, and that somehow the form of that relationship coming to an end was the thing that has led to an even deeper faith. And I've also needed it because my whole life plan completely got derailed.
Yeah. Yeah. Man. First of all, thank you for sharing that. That's a beautiful story, and for everything that you had to pack in there, I would say you did a remarkable job of doing it justice. There's so many themes in. I mean, could talk about that story for like a week. So I'm just trying to decide what I want to ask about.
Well,
I'm wondering about. Oh, go ahead.
I've never compacted it all into such a concise narrative either. So thank you for the opportunity. And I don't know, it feels in service of something for me to share it, even though it is it is sacred. It's all sacred to me in every sense that it could be, but it doesn't feel like a kind of sacred that in the right context I need to guard.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about, I guess I'll start here. When you brought up the cross, how did that exploration unfold to you? I'm curious about, just because the cross is central and suffering is central in this experience. So how did the cross start to call to you?
Well, I had an aversion, I would say, to that aspect. The church I would visit was a Catholic one, and it has the 12 stages of the cross in paintings all around it. And I felt like that there was something off in the tradition, that it was so focused on this, that it wasn't, focused on the living Christ. There's kind of a dark, deeply, deeply dark romance quality to Christian religion, Catholic religion. But I found this one spot, this kind of like side alcove of the church that felt quite old, and there was a Madonna, and then behind it a memorial to the soldiers from the First World War, which also was adorned with an image of like a soldier on a hilltop who's leaving to the war, and then on the other side is the wife and the children, and then sort of directly between them is the cross, like behind, and then like a blood red sunset. And that's an image that I've been thinking about a lot, or just drawn to. As I say, the cross everywhere, like on the houses, all over the cemetery, everywhere I would go. And so it was almost like subliminal or subconscious, or like I didn't know what I was looking for, but it was like slowly the thing that's at the core of our culture starts to like, what's going on here? Like this thing that is, there's this weird like, I don't know if occlusion is the right word, but we see it and not see it in some
Mhm.
sense, because the deep meaning of it is not something you have a relationship to. So yeah, I don't know, like a
Mm,
curiosity.
mm. Yeah. So how does it how did your perspective of suffering change throughout this time? And maybe how does that weave in with this, with the cross? Because there's like, you're averse to suffering at this point, right? You're very much, it sounds like you're resistant to it, right? You don't like the fact that this dark romance at the heart of Christianity, but then like, but it's grabbing you in a sense. And it seems like, if I remember your story correctly, you weren't at a point where you were experiencing a ton of personal suffering at this point. Is that right?
Um, well, yeah, certainly not to this scale that I did after. Yeah.
Sure, sure. So how did that evolve for you? How did that, as you move through this time of separation and then trying to integrate that? How did this, because toward the end you have this dream. It's this like traumatic and brutal kind of, with obviously the cross and crucifixion as its content, and then you experience this metanoia. So
Um, as I was entering into the dark night period, I found myself drawing on the resource of prayer and being in churches more and more and more. And previously, being in nature had been the thing, and it's resourced me very well. And speak at great length about that. But this became another really important thing, and so I was in there every day and being present with it and beginning to kind of have vocal prayer and trying to have that dialogue that gave relief to my heart and made me feel like more communed. uh, um, but in the course of this whole experience blowing up, the crucifixion was what came to mind. It's what I
mhm,
felt. I felt like I was experiencing a crucifixion of the heart.
sure, sure.
And so I guess, yeah, the images and the language had been seeping into my experience. I'd also been reading Nikos Kazantzakis' The Last Temptation,
Mm,
which is an incredible fictional but somehow more than fiction account of the life of Christ. So
mm,
in any case, I kept visiting churches throughout the summer, um, and and then I went to France for a retreat for a month at Life Itself, and there was a church there in Bergerac with another one of those memorials to the First World War, and in front of it was this incredible uh, carved out of stone statuesque scene of the crucifixion, and just like the
mm,
disciples, Mary, and just like the woe and despair of everybody like crystallized. And I would sit in front
mm,
of that and contemplate that. uh, so I guess it became only when I was really, really suffering did it become helpful it became that thing that it became meditation, or I could dialogue with those images more.
Mm. Mm. Because yeah, wow, that's amazing. Because it feels like hearing you and going on that journey with you, it feels like the cross presented itself to you in order to take your suffering in some sense. Like it didn't take it away magically. Like it had to work on you, right? Like you because there's something about these traumas that we experience and these disconnections that you can choose to take them on. You can go into them and you can experience the suffering of them. You can bear your cross, or you can avoid doing that. But if you avoid doing that, of course, you will bear your cross, and it will just catch you up in more and more things outside of itself. But it won't actually resolve the thing itself. You will suffer from it. The question is just, will you accept the suffering voluntarily and thereby actually reintegrate the trauma? And like, I guess that's one of the things I'm seeing in this journey for you. It's almost like the cross presented itself as a symbol to you, and the crucifixion, and proleptically, before you experienced this a crucifixion of your own heart, as you said, and then sounds like you were really faithful to that suffering though throughout the summer. You didn't run away from it. You were faithful to it, and you did cry, right? And you did you didn't minimize it. You didn't try to do the thing that a lot of modern Christians think the cross is actually about, where you just say, oh no, it takes it for me, right? It's gone. It's like, no, you participated the cross. Like there was, like, ultimately it did grant you freedom in this metanoia that ends the story, but it wasn't a kind of magical, relief simply because you released it and said some propositions and agreed to some things. It was I'm going to posture myself in relation to this symbol because, well, and in some sense through my own suffering, and then it almost becomes a portal through which that can move, something like that. How does that land for you?
Yeah, it's nicely put. I definitely think that my journey with the Logos, my journey with, trauma healing in nature, and becoming someone who's open to these processes and attending to them as they're occurring and letting it flow through. Like I had done I was well prepared.
Mm-hmm.
I had undergone a quest that had given me the preparation necessary to then meet that thing and not be, although I was completely blasted over several times during the process, ultimately kind of coming back to letting it flow through and attending to it. And but there is some sense in which the symbol crucifies you, or something like that. Like it is such a profound symbol, and it has to enter into you. I think it comes, the symbol is coming inside, such that you're communing with it. And, and that's it. I suppose it gives some solace initially to people when they're suffering, to see it out there, but then as the contemplation deepens, it's coming more inside. And then at a certain point, it is as if you're being crucified, although not that particular physical torture. And then I guess there's a giving over to God that must have been essential to Christ on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you get the what's at the intersecting point, what's the kind of the eye of the needle of the cross.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is something that I couldn't have believed. I still don't believe it.
Now, what does it mean to believe? What's that?
There's some self-evident quality to it now that it doesn't require me to believe anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe that's the thing, right? You know, I'm yeah. How do you participate and not believe, but not because you disagree or it's not that you don't believe exactly. It's just that you don't believe in the kind of affirmative way that we often, I think, associate with belief. At least from my perspective. There's not an exclusivity in this belief. It's an apophatically held. Because it's not a belief that, like, so oftentimes we set up beliefs as being polarities, right? I believe this in order to denote that I do not believe that. And I don't think that's how it actually works. If you are in contact with that which is really real.
I'm also interested because I know the cross has been, it's been one of the core things that your recent dialogues have been contending with. Another reason why we're having this conversation today, in addition to what I said earlier. Yeah, I don't know. I just invite, like, if there's more reflection on this, or what it means. What does it mean to you?
I think about symbols as being these, like when you talked about the symbol coming inside you. For me, the way I see something like the cross, anything that I experience as a true symbol, is being something that looks like a keyhole or something like that I can place my attention behind in some sense, and then kind of place my attention into, and then from there I can see everything else. So I often struggle where to begin the approach towards talking about some of these symbols that seem to be almost transcendent. Maybe not seem to be transcendent. I think actually are transcendent. So what does the cross mean to me? I mean, I think on an existential level, what we've just been talking about in your story is an unbelievable approach to looking at what the cross can mean psychologically, what the cross can mean to participate in our own lives, especially the crucifixion aspect of the cross. Because in some sense, that means of approaching the cross and contemplating the crucifixion and the sacrifice of Christ and all those kinds of things, that perspective on it is the move toward the metanoia, right? It's the journey out of the cave by means in and through the suffering. But like you said, and you alluded to it, I think in your relation of that story, that the story doesn't end there. There's a celebration afterwards, right? And so if we only look at the cross through that perspective, we can get bound up in a kind of asceticism or wallowing in the sorrow. And I think the cross, as much as it is that, it is also a symbol that brings together and demonstrates the transcendence to the celebration beyond. Because one of the ways that I like to think about the resurrection and well, Christ as such, but the resurrection is where the cross comes back together in a way, because you can think of the cross as the connection of the horizontal and the vertical, the ontology of being and the multiplicity of the finitude, and that it's the binding of the cross back together that leads us to the kingdom of heaven. It's like I have to go in and through the suffering to find the metanoia, the crux of the matter, right? The turning point. But then I now live in the cross, like the cross as the connecting point of all things now truly becomes my being in the world. I become like, I'm no longer a kind of disconnected, disjointed multiplicity of personalities and all these things, but I actually am the point at which the spark of the divine that is within me engages with reality itself. And so that's still the cross symbol somehow. So that's one way.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad I asked. If it's perhaps then if it's still really, really fucking morbid, that may be an indication that we have not traveled through it yet. Because there is celebration, and there is what was coming through in the days after was gratitude. Possibility of healing, relationship, and could be healed. And that became such I felt like a healing orientation to all these different aspects of my life, and a patience towards how long it would take to enact all of that. In terms of the ecstasis and the joy, I feel like I've got plenty more journey to go.
Yes.
In a good way, the celebration of what I've already experienced feels like only in the early stages. So,
yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I commend you very much, and I deeply appreciate the posture that you've held towards your own life through this story. I mean, in some ways, that's maybe the first thing, is the posture you're going to take towards your own life. And the one other thing that came up for me in there was the ability to be happy and sad at the same time, and to hold space for to be able to hold space for the immensity of suffering that confronts you, yet still hold space for the joy of all the things that are good and all the things that are beautiful. Yeah,
that feels like the proper inhabiting
mm.
at this point, and it has been a feeling of both of those things. It's heart open to both. But I think the last thing I wanted to thread on was just a recognition for me that there is something about this that is similar to psychedelic breakthroughs, in the sense that something at the depth, something at the deeper level has shifted, but still over the course of weeks, I feel like the old thought patterns coming in from left or right field. But the difference has been underneath, like at the core, they have no hold. There's when you shift things down here, there's still like this whole sort of architecture up here that's slowly getting disentangled, and that's all of the little shifts and all of the little cries that come through, and that's how big psychedelic integration has been for me as well. It's how it feels, very similar in that respect.
Yeah, that's a beautiful description. I resonate with that deeply. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me, chatting with me for a while. This has been a joy.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Thank you for your questions and your sharing, and glad to finally do this.
Until next time.